You want to win more games, guys? To dominate every game in Direct Strike, you only need one thing to know. It's called unit counters. And in this video, I will show you the weakness of every unit so that you can own your games. Let's get into it, guys. Footmen and ghouls are getting countered from the same things. They're both very squishy and cheap in the price. So if you want to make a frontline out of them, you need a lot of them. So Nova and Immolation, for example, is really good. Or you can also just turn them into skeletons, and then you get just a really big skelly army out of their weakness. The Huntress are actually pretty squishy in itself, so they are like not a good unit. That's why you don't need to counter them so hard. But every pierce damage is like really good against them. You just need to make sure that you also have a tanky front line to protect your pierce damage dealer, and then Huntress will have a really hard time. Because the grunts are so expensive, the easiest counter is just to swarm them. So you just want to make a lot of footmen or a lot of ghouls, and then you can simply surround them, and then they have no chance, because then you will simply have way too much damage output. I mean, the pierce damage dealers are getting obviously countered really hard from footmen with the defend upgrade, because then you get only 50% of damage onto it. That's the best counter on tier 1 by far. And on top of this, you just want to have a really beefy front line with, for example, just a lot of grunts, because the pierce damage is doing not much damage to the front line. This is the same for all 4 of the pierce damage dealer. So that's also why you don't want to play them in the early game so much, because they are literally doing nothing against the opponent's heavy front line. Then we have the casters, guys. The sorcerers are kind of getting countered from themselves, because they are like just giga weak in the meta. So you don't need a specific counter to them, because everything simply will beat this. The dryads are also pretty weak to literally all the casters, because they're just too reactive, dealing really bad pierce damage against the opponent's heavy front line. If you still want to counter them, then you should play pierce damage against them. The banshees and shamans are kind of a bit hard to counter. So what to do, guys? Okay, the answer is pretty easy. You just need to counter the magic damage, because then they are useless. And the only thing in the early game to counter this are the banshees with the anti-magic shell. So banshees with the anti-magic shell are the hard counter to sorceress and also to shamans. Then the opponent has to attack, because he needs to remove the shell to have any chance. Also, the shell is actually countering every single hero which deals a lot of magic damage, which are nearly all of the heroes. And also the shell counters, honestly, even the Dark Ranger, because then the overeffect will not get applied to the anti-magic units. So Banshee's really strong in the early game, but also Banshee's getting really hard countered from all summons, because they have no dispel. So really good against magic damage and really weak to summons. The siege units are a unit which doesn't need a specific counter, because they are more utility which you mix in your army. You will never mess them. So to count them on their own is not really necessarily, and there is also no real counter in the game. The only thing you kind of could consider a counter is air units, because these guys cannot shoot up. So that's something you could do if the opponent is messing them, just to avoid their damage at all. The priest guys, they are countering together with the spirit walker on tier 2 the banshees, because they have AoE Dispel, and AoE Dispel is beating Banshee Magic Shell, so they are countering Banshees pretty hard. And on their own, they're getting countered also from Dispel against them, because they will just buff a lot of units with the Inner Fire on tier 3. The Gargoyles are getting countered from all pierce damage dealers, because they are really weak with the unarmored armor to them. And on their own, they are the counter to all air units, because they are having a really good anti-air attack. So that's really where they're shining. The hippos don't need any counter and countering nothing, because they're just too weak on their own. So just don't play hippos, guys, because they're totally trash. And the witch doctor is countering all slow AoE damage, like Blizzard, because the heal is really strong over time. So he's really weak to high burst damage, like a Nova, because then the units will die really fast and can't get healed up. Yeah, but if you have a lot of HP on your units and they are having also a long time till they die, then they're really strong, and the healing word on its own cannot get countered at all, because it's too far in the back and nothing can reach it. So healing ward on its own has literally no counter, and that's why it's really strong in the game. This Spellbreaker, guys, I mean, because they're magic immune, they are countering naturally all magic damage. You should still not mess them really much because they are also kind of weak to all normal damage dealers, so to all frontliners. But they also kind of are specific counter also to summons with the tier 3 upgrade. And you also simply can just steal opponents' buffs. So they are really good simply against all spells. The Necromancers are really good if your opponent has obviously no Dispel, because they're summoning a lot. They're really weak to all AoE Dispel, like Death Throws, Priests, and Spirit Walker. And yeah, that's about the Necros. They're also really weak to all AoE damage, honestly. Like Immolation is also on top, a really good counter against them. So the Walker, we already talked about what they counter. But what is the counter to Walkers? The counter to Walkers is for like all casters, also just AoE against them. Because with the Spirit Link, you also kind of just want to remove really efficiently all the links. So just get also some sort of mass AoE. Also Pierce damage is really strong against the unarmored again, but you need to break first the front line. The Druid of the Claw. So what you really want to do against them is just magic damage. So chimps or worms are really good against them. Even Griffin's doing a good job. And then they will just have a hard time to sustain against the high magic damage. You can also play fairies against them, because if your opponent is not toggling off the spells, which they have a lot of, then it will actually just die to the high fairy magic procs. The gyros, guys, yeah, like the gyros are the same as the hippos. Don't play them. They are complete useless, they are really weak, they are doing nothing unless you have 50 of them in one turn. So they don't need any counter because they are just trash on their own. The statue is really hard to counter, honestly. The heal is just super utility, and how you counter it? Like, you can't really snipe it, it's staying always in the back line, so you kind of have to kill the front line first. So honestly, the only counter to the statue is play statue on your own to kind of mitigate kind of some sort of healing of your opponent with your own heal. But you can't really actively counter this, and that's why this is also such a strong unit. The Raiders, they are getting countered from all normal damage, so all frontline units. The Druid of the Talon, also a pretty good anti-air unit on their own. They're only bad against Death Throws and Fairies because they are magic immune. And how we want to counter this themselves. Against fairies, they are really bad because they are casting so much. So fairies are really good as they are against all the caster units, obviously. And elsewise, you can also play Gargs against them, or also Hippo Riders. The Dragonhawks, yeah, kind of also more of a shitty unit on their own. So I feel like the Dragonhawks actually need no counter themselves. Yeah, the Shade is kind of the same. Like, the Shade is a useless unit, it's doing nothing on its own, so you don't have to counter this because it's complete useless. Kodo Beast is giving just a really good buff, and it's the same as for the statue. Like, you can't really reach the Kodo Beast, so you can't really count it. The Fairies, I said already, good against all the magic units and weak to anti-air, aka Gargs, and also weak to Fiends, because the web is just making them impossible to use their spells. Then tier 3, guys, the Knights. Yeah, the Knights got buffed a lot, but honestly, the Knights are still trash. So the Knights don't really need any specific counter. If you want to get really rid as soon as possible of them, just get magic damage, chimps, worms on tier 3. That's really good against them, but they will also kind of lose to anything else because they're just weak. Same for the Torrents, not a good unit, really weak to also chimps and worms, but they also lose just to all good frontline, so you don't need to do much to counter this. The Abos are a bit more nasty, but also against the Abos it's the same. Just worms, chimps, and then they will really suffer a lot. And the Mountain Giants are a bit different. They are getting kind of countered from the Knights, but they will still kind of lose the fights mostly, because if you play Knights and chimps and your opponent MGs and chimps, then your frontline will be done before your opponent's frontline is done. So against the Giants, you can just play your own Giants if you have them. That's pretty decent. Or you just really just go for mass frost worms or chimps because they have just the highest damage and are really good. Also, all the buffs are really good against them, and you also can just get the Orb of Corruption to get rid of the armor, because they have kind of low armor on the giants. So if you get Orb of Corruption on your hero and get the minus armor in, then they will actually die pretty fast, and they are kind of nasty elsewise. Yeah, and on their own, the giants countering, honestly, all small unit dealers. So all tier 1 pierce damage, all tier 1, tier 2 magic damage dealer getting completely countered from the giant. So you just have to really get something that deals just one big shot, like the worms or the chimps, to not suffer so much into the reduced armor they gaining. So the tanks, they are really good also as the giants against all small tier 1, tier 2 magic and pierce damage. They're also kind of weak to all tier 1, tier 2 in general. The only thing they're not weak to on tier 2 is the anti-siege units, and on tier 3 you can also play worms and chimps pretty nicely against them. You obviously can also just play siege engines your own against the siege engines, and elsewise you will suffer really hard if you have nothing. Also, of Corruption is doing a good job against these guys with the minus armor, and yeah. So they are countering a lot and kind of are hard to counter, and that's why they're also so strong. The Death Throws, I also said already, countering Banshees really hard, countering in general all the magic damage, because they are also magic immune, and they are also good against all frontline units except of the siege engines and giants. So really good against knights, abos, bears and torrents. The Bad Riders are on the same boat as hippos and griffins. They are just don't need any counter, because they are just trash on their own. So don't play them, and you don't even need to counter them, because they are doing nothing. So don't do it. Just ignore them, and they will simply just do nothing and die, and you're happy. The Hippogriff Riders though are also pretty good. They are weak to, actually not so much, guys. They are kind of weak to themselves. Mustangs is also good against them, but you really need a lot of them, because they can because the hippos can outrange the engines. So the Griffins, guys, also a decent unit. They are getting countered from the Hippo Riders really hard. They're also having some hard times against actually the siege engines with the anti-air upgrade. On their own, they are countering kinda all ground units in general, because they are dealing really high magic damage. They're also splashing through the ground, and they are kind of a bit weaker to the air units. So also Wyvern are really good against them. Also Worms are good against them, because they are just splashing not well through the air as through the ground. The Worms and the Chimps are also both really good against all ground units, unless they are magic immune, really strong high splash damage, and are weak, as I said, to the Hippo Riders. The Wind Riders are weak to the Hippo Riders, are also weak to the siege engines, because they are kind of squishy, but can also counter, for example, the giants and the chimps pretty nicely, because they have really high single target damage, also with the poison upgrade. And the chimps on their own are countering themselves all buildings, and are weak to all anti-air, because they can't shoot against the air units. If you have questions, ask me in the comments. Elsewise, if you like what you see, hit the sub button to get more Direct Strike videos in, and have a nice one.